Welcome everybody to The Green Dream with me, Lawrence Gosling. And today, actually, we're not going to talk specifically about sustainable or ESG investing. We're going to talk about social impact investing. So I'm very pleased to be joined by Simon Chisholm from a firm called Resonance. Simon, thank you very much for coming in.
Pleasure.
So I'm going to put you through the same set of questions that people who are in the ESG sustainable space. So I guess first question, how do you differentiate social impact investing, which is what you and Resonance do, from sustainable or ESG investing?
Sure. Well, I think the first thing to say is this is part of a spectrum of investment. And we begin with responsible and sustainable investment really as focusing on avoiding harm or generally benefiting people and the planet. And putting environmental, social governance, ESG screens on all investments that are made are really the approach that's now pretty standard, I would argue. Impact investment is taking that one step further and seeking to intentionally focus investment on contributing to some of the solutions to either social or environmental problems or both. And that's that intentionality which distinguishes it. But it's still possible within impact investment to also generate, good returns.
And you're looking at sort of almost what I would describe as kind of localized investments, dealing with some of the major issues within the particular regions, perhaps within the UK. So when you get approached by a social enterprise or another relevant organisation, kind of what are you looking for before you decide to allocate capital to them?
Sure. Well, Resonance's approach starts with particular solutions to particular problems. So we have to answer that question in the context of whichever initiative we're talking about. So broadly speaking, we have three types of funds. We have some property funds, which focus on solutions to issues like homelessness, learning disability, vulnerable women. And in those funds, we are looking for organisations who need residential property to help break down some of the problems that people in those areas face. And we're looking for their effectiveness as an organisation focused on those issues and the way they can use that property to help solve that issue, while still generating for investors a property-style return. We have some other funds that focus on local communities and the assets that they need, particularly in areas like affordable housing, community energy, which can be a renewable energy angle, obviously, and also areas like sports and leisure. In those funds, we're looking for communities who want to do something for themselves but need the capital to make that happen. And then finally, we have some smaller funds that focus on broader social enterprise across the UK and its need for growth capital. And there we are looking for really good social enterprises who have an effective business model but having a real impact on an issue in their area. And we screen them for both of those things.
Now, sustainable ESG investing has become quite mainstream to sort of talk about. I mean, the flow of money is good, but it's not as significant as other areas. Social impact investing is the smaller version at the moment. Given the kind of issues that you're addressing through your investments, what do you think has held it back from perhaps being talked about as regularly as sort of broader sustainable investing is?
I think, as you say, initially some of the amounts in question seem smaller for the mainstream industry. I guess the main game has been moving towards that responsible, sustainable ESG approach. But I think increasingly as that becomes the norm, many types of investors are asking, is it possible to be more intentional with their investment while still generating good commercial risk-adjusted returns? So I think it's that which we're seeing. So a good example of that in the pensions industry is Pensions for Purpose, which is now convening a lot of UK pension funds around the issue of impact investments specifically as distinct or beyond ESG.
And what do you think the sort of broader asset management companies, some of the others in your part of the world, can do to sort of improve the knowledge of social impact investing in particular?
Do more of it. Just I think often it's about the amounts that are being deployed and people can see that this is real investment into real assets or companies that can generate return. But as we do that, we also, as Resonance, report each year on the impact side through impact reporting, which is a really effective tool often for people to realise this is investment and impact in one opportunity.
And I guess there's probably an issue that you come across where people kind of they've always put sort of, well, I'm giving up performance for outcome, or my sort of principles. That's talked about in the sustainability space quite a lot. Do you have that? And if so, how do you kind of address that with people? Go, it's fine, I get what you're doing, Simon, but I'm not actually going to get a realistic return out of it.
So I think that comes back to this concept of that spectrum of capital.
Yeah.
If you start with responsible, sustainable investment, that is generally generating commercial returns as well.
Mm-hmm.
You can push that into impact investment and be more intentional about the things you want to do to solve problems,
Yeah.
and still generate some commercial risk-adjusted returns. There are forms of impact investment where you push further and say the impact we want to have with this investment is going to necessitate a trade-off.
Yeah.
So both exist within impact investment. We would argue that actually what we can do, for example, through property funds, generates returns which are completely commensurate with a mainstream property fund,
Yeah.
but are focused on specific impact. So that's an attractive thing for a pension fund. If we look at what we do with enterprise growth funds, it requires a tax relief from the government, the social investment tax relief, to really make that a commercial return for an investor.
Yeah.
But that relief now exists, so it makes it easy for individual investors to back social enterprise.
Now, often people's attention is caught by statistics, a sort of fact in this kind of area. They go, "Wow, didn't know that." Are there any that you share that or sort of occur to you that always catch people's attention when you mention them?
I think people often look for big numbers, and big numbers are not in and of themselves the answer. But what really struck me a year or two ago was realising that when you look at the whole of the capital stock across the UK, which is £6 trillion, even at that point, 25% of it was already in ESG. So that's already happening. But what's more impressive is the expectation over the next few years that that's quickly going to move to more than 50%. So we are going to see a doubling, tripling of the amount of capital that is in that environmental sustainable space. And then from that, we think impact investing will increase similarly.
Okay. And on a personal level, how would you describe your sort of your kind of credentials in the broader sustainability? Frustrated eco warrior, reluctant recycler. How would you describe yourself?
I hope I've progressed beyond the reluctant recycler. I think it's always good to be self-aware, and I think there's increasingly all sorts of ways that we're being encouraged to be more self-aware about the impact we're having. Resonance itself is a B corporation. So
you probably need to explain that for a lot of the viewers.
B Corporation is an accreditation that any company can go for, which says that the way that we run our own business is that taking account of people and planet.
Yeah.
And so there are environmental tests within that we are now beginning to subject ourselves to, just in terms of the way that we run our business, for example. Aside from what we invest in.
Yeah.
So I think, I would not claim to be an eco warrior, but I hope I am pushing down that curve.
And on a personal level, do you find yourself making choices about, paper bags versus plastic bags? Or, I keep asking people hand dryer versus, paper towels, because I think, as the viewers know, we have both in our sort of toilet. So I face a daily dilemma on that front.
Yeah.
Do you look at issues like that, or maybe just on the car side of things?
Yeah. On the paper towel issue, I do remember someone doing a demonstration of how to dry your hands with one paper towel.
Oh, wow.
Rather
Okay.
than 5.
Well, when we finish this, you'll have to show me.
And it's things like that. It's self-awareness, isn't it? Ultimately,
Yes.
of the resources that we're using in very daily tasks.
It's the cup of tea or coffee, sustainably produced, obviously, question. So you have a choice, more than 2 choices, Greta Thunberg or Sir David Attenborough, or maybe somebody else that you'd like to meet. And who would it be and why?
Right. It's very hard to not say David Attenborough,
Yes.
because he is a bit of a cult hero in my family, and my son has a picture of him with the gorillas on his T-shirt. But I would pass up David to have a chat with Greta.
Yeah.
And I think the reason would be she is the next generation, and I strongly believe that there needs to be a lot of dialogue between intergenerational aspects of this problem.
Yeah.
A lot of the wealth in the world is obviously stewarded by people of an older generation. There's a lot of wealth transfer happening over the next few decades to younger generations, and I think it's that dialogue which is going to be so important.
I suspect you also might think you were quite cool if you got to hang out with Greta Thunberg.
That may also be a benefit.
Absolutely. And just final question, if you had a dream, a green dream, something that would simply make the world a better place, doesn't have to be specifically environmental, given the kind of issues you're trying to tackle, what would it be?
Yeah, well, it may sound kind of modest in an environmental context because I think there are some huge problems out there that we've got to fix. But I think looking from the perspective of what I'm doing and what Resonance is doing, a dream would be to see 100% of investment capital conscious of its impact on the environment and society, which is still some way off.
Okay, lovely. Simon, thank you very much.
Very good to speak to you.